am Dr. Silas Mordaunt, Associate Professor of Literature. I have been informed by people whose opinions I regard with the warmth one reserves for a damp invoice that I am required to produce this. I should note for the record that I submitted a proposal of a 13-part series on the epistolary novel that was rejected on the grounds that it lacked discoverability. The series you are currently watching was greenlit in 12 hours. I'm given to understand that this represents a success. However, I have been asked not to discuss the matter further, which is very telling in itself. Wouldn't you agree? We are here to examine Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, not to celebrate it. Celebration is for people who have run out of things to say, but to dissect it. My thesis is this: Great Expectations is not a novel about social mobility. It is a novel about the impossibility of social mobility. It is dressed in the clothes of a success story, yes, but Pip is not a hero. And today we are going to trace his manufacture, beginning where all such stories must begin, in the mud. The graveyard origin, the baptism of fear. We begin in chapter 1, in a churchyard on the Kentish marshes. Most readers treat this as Gothic atmosphere, fog, tombstones, of course a frightened child. This is a misreading. What happens in that graveyard is a hostile takeover. Abel Magwitch rises from between the graves, smothered in mud, and lamed by stones, and cut by flints. And his first act is to invert Pip physically, turning the boy upside down to empty his pockets. A search for food? Or is it the establishment of total sovereignty over another person's body? Before Pip can truly form a concept of his own future, a stranger has demonstrated that the future is negotiable, and that negotiation will not be on Pip's terms. The debt Magwitch imposes, a rusted file, some stolen food, and of course the vow of silence. It's not a transaction. Pip leaves that churchyard marked, and he will spend the rest of the novel discovering, to his considerable distress, exactly whose mark it is. Interestingly, behind Magwitch, visible from the marshes, are the hulks, prison ships moored in the estuary, like the Empire's dirty conscience. The convict crawled out of that system and immediately made Pip a collaborator in it. The expectations of the title are germinated here. They're germinated in terror and coercion before the boy has any expectations at all. And against this, Dickens places Joe Gargery. There are always sentimental folk amongst us. And turns out they enjoy reading. And those such folk call Joe the moral heart of the novel. For all their weaknesses, they're not wrong there, but they mistake warmth for safety. Joe is mild, good-natured, sweet-tempered, easygoing. He is, in the language of the class system that surrounds him, a man who has accepted his position. And this acceptance, however dignified, makes him the boundary Pip is taught to escape. The tragedy of Joe is not that he is simple, it's that his goodness has no purchase on the world that matters. When he tells Pip, "We are ever the best of friends," he means it. entirely. And it is this sincerity that the powerful will eventually weaponize. The elite do not need to attack Joe directly. They only need to teach Pip to read Joe through their eyes, at which point Joe's illiteracy becomes evidence of unworthiness rather than evidence of a system that denied him schooling. The Forge is the paradise that Pip is conditioned to despise. And what of Satis House? Satis means enough. It's perfect. The house of enough is a monument to insufficiency, to a woman who froze time at the moment of her humiliation and has spent 2 decades feeding on the wound. Miss Havisham is still in her wedding dress. The cake rots on the table. The clocks read 20 to 9. And of course, Pip is not brought to Satis House out of charity. He is brought there as a whetstone. Havisham needs a common boy to sharpen her instrument against. And Estella, therefore, needs a subject on whom to practice what she's being taught. These goals are the same. The othering of Pip, which began in the graveyard as physical terror, it's here formalized into an education. He is placed inside a space of enormous wealth and made to understand repeatedly that he does not belong in it. His hands are wrong, his boots are thick, his vocabulary is common. This is how the elite manufacture desire. They make you a spectator to your own exclusion, and then they leave the door ever so slightly open. So Havisham perhaps is the architect, but Estella is certainly the instrument. Estella does not hate Pip. Hatred would require investment. She notices him the way one might notice an object left in the wrong room, with mild reflexive disdain. He is a common labouring boy, she says, not shouted, not spat, not yelled, says, simply observed, as a matter of objective fact. And this is the most effective tool the powerful possess, not anger but certainty. Estella doesn't need to argue that Pip is inferior. She simply proceeds as though it's already settled. And because Pip is a child in a strange house, full of people who appear to know things he doesn't, well, he accepts this classification. And once he agrees that he is common, the work is done. He's no longer a boy from a forge with a sufficient life. He's now a supplicant. He's waiting to be told how to become otherwise. He falls in love with the girl who did this to him, which is, of course, the point. The carrot and the stick are often the same person. And we're told with great regularity that education is the great equalizer. In Dickens, education is the great divider. Pip seeks out Biddy to teach him to read and write. But what is the motivation? Does he want knowledge? What he wants is distance from the forge. He wants to be uncommon, so that a girl who humiliated him might find him acceptable. And every word that Pip learns is a brick placed between himself and Joe. This is the mechanism. The promise of enlightenment is used to strip the labouring class of its own solidarity. Pip begins to see Joe's illiteracy as not necessarily a lack of opportunity, because that is what it is, but he sees it as a lack of worth. And Pip's education proceeds, and the boy from the forge becomes progressively more comfortable in the company of people who will never consider him an equal, and progressively less comfortable in the company of the man who would give him anything. I will note, without elaboration, that this dynamic is not unique to Victorian fiction. And perhaps we should move on. Enter Jaggers. If Joe is the heart and Havisham is perhaps the bile, Jaggers is the cold, unfeeling brain of the social order. The man with the scented soap who washes his hands of his clients the moment he's done with them. He arrives at the forge to announce Pip's great expectations with the clinical indifference of a coroner delivering their findings. So what we have here is Jaggers as the interface between the mud and the money. What is most instructive is what he refuses to say. He will not name the benefactor. This is a mechanism. There is a purpose. By refusing Pip the name of his patron, Jaggers keeps the boy in a state of perpetual conditional existence. Pip is a gentleman only because Jaggers says he is. He has no rights, no allowances. Proxy protects the principle, and Pip is a puppet who's been handed his strings as a gift, and he willingly takes them. The great psychological achievement of the system is that Pip believes he has been chosen. He constructs a narrative in which his selection is a recognition of something inherent in him. There is some quality in him that Havisham perceived and decided to nurture. We know this narrative is entirely false. What the reward fallacy produces is misdirected gratitude. Pip's loyalty flows toward the refined classes because he believes they are responsible for his elevation. He buys into the lie of the meritocracy, the idea that he's moving upward because he deserves it, even as every string of his existence is being pulled by a man working a sheep station on the other side of the world. Is he a hero? No, Pip is not a hero in any sense. He's a trophy. And not even a trophy for his own purposes, but he's a trophy in someone else's argument. So Pip arrives in London and finds it ugly, crooked, narrow, and dirty. And this is his first and last accurate perception of the city. London proceeds to teach him to stop seeing and start forming. The process is the replacement of labour with appearance. To be a gentleman in London is to be a professional consumer. And how do we consume? Through debt. Pip buys clothes, club memberships. He also buys the services of a servant he neither wants nor knows how to manage. He accumulates these things because they are the syntax of the class he is attempting to occupy. The London filter strips away the last remnants of the blacksmith and replaces them with financial liability disguised as taste. The more Pip consumes, the more thoroughly he is owned. Not necessarily specifically by Magwitch's money now, not anymore, but by the more abstract machinery of credit, which is more efficient and also considerably harder to escape. So Pip joins a social club. The Finches of the Grove exist to spend money, get drunk, and quarrel about nothing with great conviction. That's their purpose. For the men born into this world, the club is a playground. But for Pip, it's more of a high-stakes audition, one he doesn't know that he is failing. He imitates their vices, and he's under the impression that their virtues will follow. They do not. The old money observes the simulation with the mild amusement of people watching a talented dog perform a trick. The performance keeps Pip occupied, keeps him worried about the correct way to order wine, and therefore he's not particularly worrying about who built the room he's standing in. It occurs to me, a remarkably stable arrangement for all parties, except Pip. So the debt trap, perhaps more of a chain. In the forge, Pip was bound by apprenticeship. It is a physical contract. It's honest. But in London, he's bound by credit, which is the same arrangement, but with the coercion made invisible. He doesn't earn the money he spends. He borrows against expectations that are themselves borrowed. So debt is the new chain. And, as always, it has the advantage of being silent and self-tightening. Pip believes his accumulation is an expression of freedom. Well, Pip's freedom, do what he wishes, when he wishes, comes crashing down on the night of the storm. Magwitch reappears. I'm your second father, you're my son, he says. And this is the moment of total cognitive collapse. Pip realizes that his refinement was not purchased by the pure old money of Satis House. It was purchased by the convict in the graveyard. Every silk waistcoat and every evening at the club was financed by the transportation labour of the man he was taught to regard as the absolute bottom of the social order. Magwitch is delighted rather than ashamed. I made him, he says. Pip's status was a spite project. The great expectations were never about Pip's future. They were about Magwitch proving his argument. Pip, again, is the vessel. Compeyson, Magwitch's co-conspirator and Miss Havisham's deserter, committed the same crimes as Magwitch. He received a lighter sentence. The reason is simply that he looked like a gentleman. The right clothes, the right accent, the right untroubled manner in a courtroom. Compeyson is the proof that Pip's gentleman's disguise will never fully protect him. The system is not impressed by the performance of a gentleman. How could it be impressed when it realizes that Pip is simply giving off signals that he has learned to imitate but cannot possess himself? The law does not care much about what you did. You see it here. The law, as always, cares about the category you occupy. And so when Pip returns to Joe in his disgrace, he wants the forge to function as an absolution, as the honest warmth of a simpler life, washing away the damage of a pretentious one. And of course it does not work. because Pip has been too thoroughly modified to receive what Joe offers. His hands are no longer suited to the hammer, and his mind no longer speaks the language of a man who is merely satisfied with what he has. Joe's forgiveness, which is immediate, total, and entirely without conditions, that forgiveness is the most devastating thing in the novel, because Pip has become someone who cannot accept it without shame. The elite did not merely remove Pip from the forge. It's almost as if they made the forge invisible to him. He can see it, but he can't feel it. The fire is there, the warmth is not. Speaking of fire, Miss Havisham dies by fire. The system she built had already produced its last result. The instrument had been deployed and had departed into her own disastrous marriage. The house of arrested time could not sustain itself once its purpose was exhausted. A sealed room has no mechanism for its own waste heat. As the house burns, Pip tries to save the woman who destroyed him. What is this? It's the instinct of a man who has no other frame of reference for authority. The rot is gone, burned away, but the damage, the class displacement, the shame, and the irreversible distance from Joe is written into Pip, into his very nervous system, with no host left to receive it. And then the ending that everyone forgets. Pip does not become a lord, nor does he go back to the forge. He goes to Cairo to work and trade. He becomes a mid-level functionary of the same empire whose failures produced Magwitch and whose wealth produced Havisham. This is the final integration. Pip has been processed through the graveyard, the forge, the city, and the debt. This terminal output is the administrative labor at the empire's perimeter. He's neutralized. He's not an anomaly. He's now a mere functioning component. The great expectations have been scaled down to a reliable salary and a position that no one will remember. Not even the readers of the book remember it. He has reached the ceiling available to someone of his particular manufacture. And at least he has the good manners not to complain about it. And how do we conclude? The final scene, Pip meets Estella in the ruins of Satis House. Two people shaped by the same system, standing in the wreckage of it. Dickens does offer something like hope. The famous mist, the held hand. I will not take the mist from you, but I will tell you what Pip is at the end of this novel, so there's no confusion. He's a forged gentleman, and that word works in both directions. He was made at a forge, and he is a counterfeit. His accent, his manners, and his debts were all arranged by other people for purposes that had nothing to do with his flourishing. Whether they wanted a trophy, or a weapon, or a commission, or a clerk. Pip wanted to be loved by a girl who was trained not to love anyone. Well, he does end the novel alive. He's solvent as well, for that matter, and yes, respectable. but he never had the chance of really ending it free. Dickens understood something that the Victorian novel was not really supposed to understand, and that was that the system does not fail. It does not buckle under its own contradictions. It recruits its own contradictions. Pip's shame, his displacement, his permanent homelessness between the forge and the drawing room, those aren't breakdowns. The machine continues to work. Of course, a man who belongs nowhere is extremely useful to an empire that needs someone to go to Cairo and not really ask too many questions about the terms. I've been thinking during this episode about Cairo, about what it means to be processed through a series of institutions to arrive finally at a position that is respectable and useful, yet not what you would have chosen. The parallel to my own situation is not something I intend to pursue on camera. I raise it only to note that I noticed it, which I suspect is more self-awareness than Pip ever managed. And perhaps that will be enough for now. So if you are watching this as a part of a university module, read the book. It is more honest about what universities are for than anything the university will tell you directly. The ledger is closed, which is perhaps the most Dickensian sentence I have produced in some time, and I produced it for this. I'm Dr. Silas Mordaunt, Associate Professor of Literature.